Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darby Dickerson. I'm the Dean at Texas Tech University School of Law and the immediate past president of Scribes. I know a lot of people took a break, but in an effort to try to keep us on schedule, two announcements. First, all of the materials from today's presentation are on the Scribes website, so you will be able to just go on that website, access them, and download them. Second, because of the generosity of Brian Garner, one of our Scribes board members, he has donated several books as door prizes. So if you're one of the lucky people whose name I call, you may come up right now and grab whatever book you would like. Adam Quigley, Jim Sowerby, Robert Middleton, Megan Hammond, Gopi Kashyap, and Dana Hill. You are our first door prize winners. You may come just grab, whoever gets here first gets the choice of the books. Again, Adam Quigley, Jim Sowerby, Robert Middleton, Gopi Kashyap, Dana Hill, and Megan Hammond. And we have some more that we will announce a little bit later on. And if you know someone who wasn't here, you can tell them to grab their book. We will keep giving them away. Okay. All right. Our second panel is on storytelling, and I'm incredibly excited to be able to share with you the talents of two amazing storytellers. They will each come up independently and give you some of their tips and wisdom. The first is Dr. Jill Patterson, who is a professor in the Department of English at Texas Tech University. She received her PhD from Oklahoma State. She has expertise in narrative nonfiction and narrative law. She has been, since 2009, working on death penalty defense teams to help those defendants and their attorneys be able to present their stories in a very stressful and important situation. Most recently, for the last 2 years, she has been serving as a Soros Justice Fellow, again, working on these capital cases. Our second speaker is Professor Lisa McElroy, who is a law professor at Drexel University in Philadelphia. She has a long history teaching legal writing and writing in a variety of legal areas, including legal pedagogy. But she also writes in other areas. She has written some very successful children's books, and most recently she has written a novel called Called On, and that has been described as Toni Morrow as the 1L of our generation. So I want you to welcome these two speakers. First, Dr. Jill Patterson, followed by Professor Lisa McElroy.
Presentation today to talk about 3 different strategies I use in narrative law, just to quickly give you some application. However, if I only get to one of them, I only get to one. If I get to 2, I get to 2, but I wanted to be prepared, okay? So basically what I do is I talk to lawyers about how to present their client's case to a judge, a prosecutor, a jury in a way that is compelling and not just legal argument. And so the first thing I want to take a look at is round versus flat characters, and the ways that the first photograph you saw before it turned to a drawing was the Waco incident, which I'm sure you know, with the Cossacks and the Banditos. And you see that photograph and immediately you assume things about those men in their motorcycle jackets, right? And we do that as writers. I mean, I'm sure in sophomore lit, somewhere in college, you heard the phrase flat character versus round character. And writers use those techniques for various reasons. So if I have a slew, like I just finished a manuscript on horse trainers, and there were several women who were riding horses out there, and one of the women was critical at some point in the plot, but not earlier, and so I needed to introduce her so she wasn't a surprise when she came up, and I tagged her. She had eyes the color of pennies. And so whenever I introduced her, I would drop that in so you would remember who she was, so that when she became this sort of plot incident later, you would say, oh yeah, okay, I recognize her. But that's the only reason why I would do that. Like, that's a strategy. I'm using her, but I would never flatten a main character in that way, which is unfortunately what happens. Sometimes journalists do it, right? A lot of my clients get these tags where they're flattened, they're reduced to this name. And if you're a defense attorney and you buy into this argument and you start seeing your client as the way they're being described in the newspaper, you're in trouble, which is frequently where I go if somebody calls and says, hey, we need help on this case. I start with the newspaper articles because I know that's where the trouble is, right? They're being reduced. If they're a drug addict, they're always going to be a drug addict. If they have anger, they're always going to have anger, but that's not necessarily the case, and so I'm looking for ways to sort of fully develop them instead of keeping them flat. So these are the ways that writers start thinking about it when we're looking at characters and what we're going to do to round them out, to make them human. So just to give you a couple of examples, and you'll see some pictures of these clients that I'm talking about. One of my clients recently was a young native Filipino man, and he's tinier than me. But now, whenever he says, "Hey, Jill, I need some undershirts," because nobody in his family is giving him any money, and he'll say, "Could you order me some extra large undershirts?" He's my size, right? And so it becomes really important for me to figure out why is it that he wants extra large undershirts, and it becomes critical at trial because prosecutors put up a dummy that was the size of a man who would fit inside those clothes and stacked it in front of the juror and said this is what he looked like the night he came into their home, which of course he didn't. He wasn't 2 feet taller than he is, and he's not super broad. The clothes were baggy. So this is what I'm saying. You look at their clothes. You look at their body language. One of my clients, I was told before I went in, he's so offensive. He can't stop talking in street slang. It's going to be one F-bomb after the other. You need to be aware of that and try not to show anything. But when I showed up, he was all, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. I didn't hear a single bit of street slang from him, right? Which was great because it sort of gave me the opportunity. He laughed at some of the words. When I said, I appreciate you visiting with me today, he said, oh, man, don't talk like some white lady. Don't appreciate me, you know? So I got it. We had a little joke going on, but I also noticed things about Ramon that other people didn't. He learned something about each and every single one of us on the team, and as a capital defense team, there were a lot of us. And so when we would show up, he knew what to ask me about. So at the time, I was 45 and I just learned how to ride a bicycle, right? And my father was 75 years old, literally running down the street beside me saying, okay, I'm going to catch you. And he'd say, make a right turn. And I'm like, no, I crash when I make a right turn. So I'm telling Ramon this story because I'm asking him, who taught you how to ride a bicycle? Because that's important. I need to know if somebody taught me, which actually was important, and I'll explain that in a minute. And so every time I came in, Ramon would say, hey, how's that bicycle riding going? Right? He wasn't a monster. He could ask me questions. He did know. And when I would leave, every single time he would say, just lean into the right turns, Jill. Just lean into them. You won't fall over if you just lean into them. And so I developed this relationship with him. And when we did finally clean him out, he said, could you send Jill in because I want to write my story down? And I haven't talked about the crime with anybody. Like, we had his case for 3 years, and he would never talk about the crime scene. So when I went in and he told me the story, I try to keep my notebook under things so they can't see that I'm writing because I think it's important to have eye contact with them. And he did drop into street mode, right? Like when he said, I'm going to tell you what happened, his face shifted. It was total street like I didn't understand half of what he was saying, right? Furiously under the table. And then when he was done, his face came back. And he said, I'm really sorry that I used those words with you. He said, but I needed you to understand what happened that day so you could explain it to my kids, right? So learning how they talk, why are they doing what they're doing. My client with the really large clothes, when I go to visit him, he's on the road now. When I go to visit him, the first time I went, I'd never seen this before, but like water was running off the phone. And I was like, Gabe, like, your phone is leaking? Like, what is that? That might not be safe. And he said, oh, no, that's just me, right? And so you get tired, you're there for a while, he's holding up the phone, and there's a pool of water around his elbow. And I'm like, oh, my God. What? Like, he's sweating profusely. And so I told his defense attorneys, I was like, man, I don't know what's going on, but you need to get somebody in there to take a look at him because something's happening. But paying attention to body language, their habits, what TV shows do they like? I've got a client right now who loves Dinosaur Train. Who would think that, this cop killer would love Dinosaur Train, right? But he does. And that's the way I can engage him in a conversation. Have you seen the new episode? I better start watching Dinosaur Train because he's going to ask me. So just trying to figure out who they are as human beings, and this is the way that writers do it. We look at ways they handle things. Ramon, my client who knew about my bicycle riding, he really hated for somebody to call him a fag. And it would make him angry, like just so quickly, so offensive. But then I later found out why it was, and it was also key to the crime scene that day. Another thing I pick up from newspapers, and not just the newspaper articles themselves, but the comments that readers will make online, which are, in my clients' cases, incredibly offensive and murderous themselves. So I go through and I take a look at the adjectives that are popping up over and over and over again. And I go to the team and I say, okay, look, this is part of the fear list because this is how they're describing your client. So let's talk about how these words actually help your case instead of hurting it. So in Gabe's case, calculating, you bet he's calculating. This is a survival skill. So if you grow up in the Philippines, in the slums of Cebu City, and you and your siblings have to swim through sewage that is up to here to dive for pesos so that you can get a tablespoon of rice to eat for the day, you bet you've got survival skills. You're calculating. You start to learn how to get what it is that you need and what you want because your parents are drug addicts. They disappear for days at a time, and you're having to take care of yourself. So that becomes part of his story, and getting that in and sort of understanding that. Poor nutrition, neglect. He's actually adopted by a family with lots of money. Here we go. We think, okay, the American dream. I'm going to America, and I'm going to live with this very famous, very wealthy family. And as it turns out, they are as horrible as his adoptive parents, but in a different way. So even there, he has to learn how does he get what he wants, how does he get what he needs, which in this case was just some attention. And so you do become calculating to get what you want. Cold? Yes. Is this a Filipino effect? I don't know, but that's something that you would need to talk to a cultural expert about to find out. Is that part of his culture? Is it a familial effect? Is it PTSD? Et cetera, et cetera. All of these things that you might look for, there are reasons why he's cold, and not just he was born a monster and he'll always be a monster. And so what we learned is when he was adopted, first of all, when he was in the Philippines, if he was hungry and him and his siblings cried, his parents put him in a paper bag and hung him over in a fire in a paper bag to make him shut up. So if that's what you're taught, then eventually you're going to become really cold. You're not going to show anybody your feelings. I don't want to go in that paper bag again over the fire. And when you show up in America and your adoptive mom says, I don't care what happened to you over there. This is America. That was the past. This is now. And your other 18 international adopted siblings are doing the same thing or being told the same thing, and you're all keeping quiet and you're just hiding. Again, that cold affect is just an affect. You were taught to do that. You hide your story. So you want to look at why are they this way. Instead of being afraid of these words, then you start to put them into use to the advantage of your client. All of these adjectives, by the way, described his parents, both his biological and his adoptive parents, and that becomes very important as well. How do you get the stories? This is one of my clients' mugshots. He doesn't look anything like that, by the way, in real life, right? Those mugshots are totally horrible. So trying to get your jury past those mugshots, that's tough. Okay, so when I was working on a case in the middle of trial, this article came across the wire. It was December, and it was called "To Fall in Love with Anyone, Do This." Okay, well, I'm intrigued, right? I'm single. What does that mean? So I click on it because I want to see, and it's this great social psychological study that was done by Dr. Arthur Aaron, where he came up with this clinical scenario and a list of 25 questions, and he put two people who didn't know each other in a room, and they asked these questions of one another, and then at the end, after several hours, they've done this back and forth, they're supposed to stare each other in the eye for 4 minutes, and then voila, they're in love, right? I don't know if that works, but I need to love my clients, sort of, right? I don't need to fall in love with them, but I have to be able to hold my head up in court and say, yes, I'm on this person's defense team, and I'm comfortable with that. I don't believe he deserves the death penalty, and so I need to love them in a way. So I started looking at his questions, and some of them were what I was already doing, because I give my student writers, in my writing workshops, if you're going to write about a character, here's some things you should know about them before you enter the story so that blank page doesn't scare you, right? Writer's block. But in the same way, I learned that those questions were really important to the clients, because a lot of my clients, nobody's ever listened to them before. So I go in with these questions. I'm different than the attorneys come in with the evidence and the 404B witnesses, and they talk to them about that, but I get to come in and say, what's your best Christmas memory? Who taught you how to ride a bicycle? And that was some of the questions that were in this study that he did. And so now I've compiled about 120 questions. I take them in sets. A lot of my clients, the first day I start asking them these questions, they give me the minimal answer. The second time I go back, they start talking a little bit more. And by the fourth visit, they're like, what are the questions today? Okay, because they've learned I'm not going to show up and say, hey, where'd you get that gun? I get to be the person who doesn't do this, but somebody on a team should be handling a client in this way. The bicycle, me sharing my bicycle story with Ramon, and that's another way. If I tell a story, if I want them to tell me about their best Christmas memory, I tell them a story about my Christmas memory. Quid pro quo, Clary, and all of that, right? You tell a story, you get a story. So I tell Ramon about my bicycle story, and he says, oh, yeah, I learned how to ride a bike. I was like, who taught you how to ride a bike? And he said, oh, no one. We had a bicycle, but it didn't have brakes, and so my grandma kept saying, don't get on that bicycle, don't ride that bicycle. He said, but I really wanted to ride a bicycle. So I got on it, and it was downhill, and they were all running after me, screaming, oh, my God, and I crashed. And I hit my head on the curb. And that was the first time I ever went to the hospital for a head injury. And I was like, oh my God, a head injury. Okay, tell me about that. But I wouldn't have known if I hadn't asked him about the bicycle incident. So sometimes just learning memories are very critical. I'll get to the birthday question for another one of my clients here in a minute. So this is Ramon. Okay, when you're interviewing family members, you also need them to tell stories, and it's very hard. You show up and they're afraid of strangers in their home. Who knows what you're really after? And it usually helps if you can get photographs of your client early on, and then when you come back, you can say, tell me about this photograph. So we got this photograph from his mother, whom we eventually really wanted to put a T-shirt on and set her in the stand that said Exhibit A, because she's just a difficult woman. But now I know her story, and I know her mother's story, and now I know her great-grandmother's story, because I go back 3 generations the way ABA guidelines require. But at the time, we're defending him. We're a little frustrated with her. And when we show this picture around, he was in and out of like 10 mental hospitals by the time he was 19. And when we showed the photograph, people would recognize his smile, but they couldn't remember anything about him. That's great. Okay, so he didn't cause trouble when he was there. But when we finally tracked down one of his elementary school teachers, his second grade teacher, she said, oh yeah, I gave him that shirt. I was like, what? And she said his mom sent him to school every day in clothes that smelled so badly, none of the other kids would sit next to him. She said his sister came dressed to the nines, but he was a rape baby. And his sister was the son of the man she was married to. And so she dressed her like a princess, and he came in rags. She said, I started providing clothes for him, that shirt, she said, and long sleeves, because he had a case of ringworm so bad it covered his whole torso. And his mom wasn't doing anything about it, but the kids wouldn't sit next to him. She said, I had to take the clothes back before I sent him home, because if I sent him home with the clothes, they'd disappear and I'd never see them again. So he would show, like all of that. That goes back to how are they dressed, right? What do I know about their clothing? And she's the one who told us that he tried to hang himself when he was 7 years old. What second grader knows what suicide is, much less how to go about doing it, correct? So, she just gave us a wealth of information, and she said when she went to see him in the hospital, she was good, she wept the whole time we were interviewing her. She went to see him in the hospital, and she said, Gabe, why wouldn't you tell me you're doing this? Why didn't you tell me that you were in trouble? And he said, well, he was being raped at home every day by a cousin and his cousin's friend. They were running a chain on him. And he said, but I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think I was a fag, right? This is my client who doesn't want to be called a fag. So now we know why it's important. His stepdad had set up a boxing ring in their living room, and all the men in the neighborhood got their 5-year-olds together, and they were fighting them like dogs and telling them, don't be a sissy, don't be a fag. They're 5, all right? So we learned this, and then I didn't know this until he told me the story after we'd already gotten the plea deal, that he said, you know, I just went there that day to get my kids because I knew that my wife had him in a drug dealer's house and I was trying to get him out. He said, and I turned to leave, but as I left, the drug dealer whose house he was at screamed after him, don't come again unless you're strapped, you little fag. So he opened the trunk, got the gun out, and went back, all right? But I didn't know that, and if I had known that and we'd gone to trial, that would have been a really important detail to bring out, right? So always looking for that connection. This is my birthday boy. This is the question when your worst birthday becomes really important. My client is the older one in the two. That's his younger brother, the little one in the picture. And on my client's 6th birthday, he was living with his mom. They were living with the mother's dad. And the granddad said, look, we don't have a car. We live out in the country and we can't get him to school and we're running drugs out here and we can't have truant officers showing up. So you got to get rid of this one. So his mom said, I'm taking you to a birthday party. She stops at a store, she buys him the toy, puts him in the car, drives him to the orphanage, sets him on the couch and says, I'll be back for you later, today. You just stay right here. So he sits on that couch till it gets dark outside, and the lady finally says, she's not coming back for you. You know, we got to show you where your bed is. And every year at Christmas, the younger child who ended up with the uncle who was wealthy, they would come get him for Christmas, and he could see his brother had a horse, he had a bicycle, he had all of this stuff, and then after Christmas they would take him back to the orphanage, right? This is a horrible story. But asking, what's your worst birthday? Well, I didn't know what I was stepping into, right? But that question becomes really important because as it is, his murder, the crime that he committed was for a car, right? And it's in his journal, in the entries before, and he's not mentally stable, you know, but the journal in the days before were, if I can just get a car, I can go to Australia and start a ranch. Okay, well, you can't get to Australia in a car. I get it, but every story was like that. If I could just get a car, I could go to the Caribbean and be a pirate. If I could just get a car, I could go do this and this and this. And he had been living in an abandoned hotel room, right? So if I could just get a car, I wouldn't have to go to the orphanage because I could have gone to school, right? So you see why it is that he's going to steal a car, and that the man he steals the car from is his partner's grandfather, right, who sent him to the orphanage, and that instead of running once he got the car, his partner got in the car and took off, he sat on the couch and waited for somebody to come get him. Okay? Like he's just reenacting the whole thing. So the photographs help. Him seeing the little brother and him and me saying, tell me about your birthday, and me asking questions that are different from, here's the evidence against you. Let's talk about 404B witnesses. That's it. That's the way you get those kinds of stories that you want. Do I still have time?
A couple more minutes.
Okay.
2 more, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Then these, I'm just going to show you these photographs here. The first time I saw crime scene photographs, I was really surprised because I thought it was just going to be, I watched too much Law and Order. I thought it was going to be dead bodies, right? And it acted like that. They took me to this office and they said, okay, all right, we hope you're prepared. Here's the slideshow. And they would stare at my face. I finally said, could you go away? Because I feel like maybe I should be embarrassed that I'm looking at these photographs you're making me. Go away. So they left, and like most of them were like this. I was like, well, what kind of crime scene is this? Where are the bodies? Where's my Law and Order? But then, great. I thought we just hit a miracle, but come to find out they do this at all capital murder crime scenes, so this is normal. But I can tell that it was closing time at this bar, right? Because the ashtrays are in there, the utensils are in the sink, everything is clean. There's a bag of chips there, and my client had been let out of prison. He'd been institutionalized since he was 18, let out of prison for 2 weeks. He was living in an abandoned gas station that was not a gas station. I was told this, but then when I said, drive me by it, I want to see it, it was like 2 walls. There was no roof. Sleeping in one room, defecating in the other room, And he didn't have anything to eat. And when I saw this photograph, I immediately knew the second he walked in that bar, he saw that rack of chips, and he was trying to figure out how to get one, right? And I'm eating in 3 days. That becomes really important. Men's room. I couldn't figure out, there's nothing happened in the men's room, but they took pictures of the men's room. Like, that's disgusting. I'm a very neat person. I wouldn't step a toe in that bathroom. But my client had indoor plumbing since he got out of prison. And I know that the whole time he was sitting in that bar, he kept looking at that bathroom thinking, can I go in there and take a bath at the sink and lock the door for 15 minutes and nobody notice? Are they going to come bang on the door? And sure enough, he did. When I asked him, did you take a bath at the sink? He said he did. So there's questions in my PowerPoint presentation, parallel events from the crime scene, what kind of baggage, et cetera, et cetera. These will help you if you start doing this for yourself. Don't think of the obvious answers. What's the theme? He was mad, he wanted revenge. No, sometimes it's loneliness. Sometimes it's shame. Sometimes it's hunger. Whatever the motive is, that needs to be part of your theme. Learn your character. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.